The hour is late. The world outside has quieted, but something stirs in the darkness, waiting, watching. The flickering glow of your screen is the only defense against the shadows creeping ever closer. Tonight, I present to you 3 chilling tales, each one a whispered warning to those who dare wander too far into the unknown. A night at the carnival turns into a sinister nightmare, where a clown's tricks are more than just illusions. A group of campers in the deep woods discover they are not alone, and what watches them is not human, and an old boarding house hides a terrible secret, buried beneath years of whispered lies and shallow graves. So sit back, but don't get too comfortable, because once the stories begin, something may be listening, and it wants in. The carnival lights shimmered against the night sky, a neon blur of color and motion. Laughter, distant screams from the rides, the buttery scent of popcorn. It all swirled together in the electric air. Crystal and her friends had spent the night indulging in everything the fair had to offer. Greasy food, dizzying rides, cheap beer. Then they saw the tent. It stood at the far edge of the fairgrounds, a little too far from the main attractions, its faded red and white stripes sagging under the weight of age. A crooked sign above the entrance read, "The Amazing Grimly, Master of Mirth and Mayhem." Inside, the air was thick, stagnant. The tent was dimly lit by flickering bulb, casting long, strange shadows. The clown stood at the center of a makeshift stage, his painted smile stretching too wide, his eyes too dark beneath the smeared white makeup. At first, his tricks were typical, juggling knives, making balloons twist into grotesque shapes. But then he did things that shouldn't have been possible. A deck of cards tossed into the air, and every single one pinned itself to the ceiling, spelling out their names. A rabbit pulled from a hat, only it had too many eyes, too many mouths. A balloon animal that twitched as though it were breathing. Crystal felt something deep in her stomach, something wrong. "We should go," she muttered. Her friends agreed. They laughed it off, pretended the eerie performance hadn't gotten under their skin. But Crystal felt his eyes on her as they left. She turned, just for a second. The clown wasn't on the stage anymore. He was standing in the aisle, watching her. She shuddered and forced herself to walk faster. Back home, Crystal locked her door behind her, trying to shake the lingering unease. She made a pot of herbal tea, hoping it would calm her nerves. But as she sipped, something gnawed at her, an itch at the back of her mind. She stood by the window, peering out into the night. Nothing. She turned off the lights, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face. She took a deep breath, told herself she was being ridiculous. Then she stepped into the hallway and froze. A balloon floated in the middle of her living room. It hadn't been there before. A simple red balloon bobbing slightly, as if something had placed it there. Her breath hitched. A slow creeping dread spread through her veins. A draft. No, all the windows were closed. A prank? No one else had a key. Then, a soft knock. Crystal turned, her pulse spiking. The knock hadn't come from the door. It had come from the window. Swallowing hard, she crept toward it, lifting the curtain just enough to see outside. Her stomach dropped. The clown from the carnival was standing at the edge of her yard, still, silent, watching. Her body went cold. The distance between them felt far too small, and yet something inside her screamed that if she looked away, he would move. She stepped back, heart hammering. The lights flickered. The balloon popped. The power cut out. Darkness swallowed the apartment. Then, a giggle. inside the house. Crystal's breath hitched. The sound was wrong, warbling like a broken record. She turned toward the hallway. The bathroom door was open now. She hadn't left it open. A shadow moved. She bolted for the front door, fingers fumbling with the lock. She yanked it open, sprinting into the night without looking back. She didn't stop running until she was pounding on her neighbor's door, screaming for help. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked from the inside. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in. The only thing out of place, a single white glove resting on her coffee table and scrawled on the wall in something thick and red. "See you soon." The carnival packed up and left the next day. No one could find any record of the amazing Grimly. No performers knew anything about a clown show. No tent, no sign, nothing. The clown was never found. But sometimes, late at night, when Crystal was alone, she swore she could still hear it, that giggle, right outside her window. The Hoosier National Forest sprawled across southern Indiana. Its vast stretches of dense trees hide countless stories, some told, most buried in silence. Ethan, Mark, and Lisa arrived late that afternoon, hiking into an isolated area few ventured into. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. The chirping birds and rustling leaves faded until only their own footsteps broke the silence. Mark was the most excited about the trip. He was always the adventurous one, the first to suggest remote hikes, night excursions, and urban exploration. "This place is legit," he had said, grinning as he adjusted his backpack. "People have reported seeing weird stuff out here. Shadows, figures, even disappearances." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Great. You took us to the freaking Blair Witch Woods." Ethan, who had driven them there, stayed silent, glancing at the towering trees. Something about the place felt off. The air was thick, charged with a static hum just beneath the surface of hearing. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, their campfire flickered in a small clearing. They roasted marshmallows, sipped beer, and laughed about old memories, trying to ignore the emptiness pressing in around them. Then they heard something not far away, a single sharp crack in the woods behind them. Lisa froze mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" Ethan nodded. Mark grabbed his flashlight, smirking. Probably just a deer. Then came another sound. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Lisa's breath hitched. "That's not a deer." The footsteps stopped. Silence settled over the forest like a held breath. Mark, never one to back down, stood and aimed his flashlight into the trees. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing but endless trunks. "See? Nothing." Then something moved, just beyond the flashlight's reach. A shadow. Tall, too tall, slipping between the trees with unnatural fluidity. Lisa grabbed Ethan's arm. "Mark, let's go back to the car, now." Mark hesitated. "Relax, it's..." Then he stopped. His face went blank, and before they could react, he turned and walked into the woods, just like that. No hesitation, no words, just walked. "Mark," Ethan shouted, scrambling to his feet. Mark didn't respond, didn't even flinch. His arms hung limply at his sides as he stepped deeper into the forest, his movements stiff, wrong. Lisa grabbed Ethan's sleeve, panic rising in her voice. "What is he doing?" Ethan snatched up a flashlight and rushed after him, but as soon as Mark passed the first row of trees, he was gone, like the darkness had swallowed him whole. "Mark!" Ethan yelled, the beam of his flashlight darting between trees. "Where are you?" No response. Lisa was sobbing now. "We have to go get help." Then, from the trees, A voice, Mark's voice, calling from deeper inside. "Guys, where are you?" Ethan and Lisa froze. The voice was wrong. It sounded farther away than it should have been, like it wasn't just coming from the trees, but from beneath them. Then the air changed. The trees seemed to press closer. The temperature dropped, and the whispers started. Hundreds of voices, soft, layered, overlapping, not just around them, inside them, slipping through their skulls like water. Lisa whimpered, "We need to run." Ethan turned back toward camp. And that's when Mark stepped out of the trees. Only it wasn't Mark. He was smiling. His limbs were too loose, his posture too unnatural, like something was wearing his skin but didn't quite know how to use it. His eyes were too dark, flat, empty. Then he spoke, but his voice was a half-second too late, like an echo trying to keep up. "Guys, where are you?" Lisa screamed. Ethan grabbed her wrist. "Run!" They ran. Branches whipped at their faces as they sprinted toward the road. The whispers chased them. So did footsteps, not theirs. Something big, something fast, just beyond their vision. By the time they burst onto the gravel road, panting and shaking, the whispers had stopped. The trees stood silent, watching. Mark was never found. Not his body, not his clothes, nothing. The authorities searched for days. But the weirdest part, the only thing they recovered, was his boot, standing upright at the tree line. And at night, in the weeks that followed, Lisa swore she heard his voice, calling from the woods, always the same thing. "Guys, where are you?" Mrs. Eleanor Dane was the kind of woman people trusted. She was sweet, soft-spoken, and always wore a powder blue cardigan, no matter the season. She ran a boarding house on the outskirts of town, a large, creaky Victorian with lace curtains and the scent of lavender lingering in the air. She took in the forgotten ones, the elderly, the lost, the people no one else cared about. And when they became too much trouble, she took care of them in other ways. It started with Mr. Holloway, an old widower whose mind had started to slip. He would wander the halls at night, muttering to himself, forgetting where he was. One evening, as Eleanor prepared his tea with just a little extra of her special ingredient, phenobarbital, enough to send him into a deep sleep. She watched as he slumped in his chair, his breath slowing. Then she took her pillow and gently, so gently, pressed it over his face until the struggling stopped. He was quiet after that. The next night, she buried him under the gardenias. More followed. Mrs. Calloway, the woman with the weak heart. Henry, the quiet man with a bad cough. Deacon Thomas, the retired preacher who kept asking too many questions. Each time, Eleanor collected their checks, stored their belongings, and smiled at the social workers who came knocking. "Mr. Holloway? Oh, he left last month. Said he wanted to see his son in Colorado. Mrs. Calloway? Poor dear, she passed in her sleep. A heart attack, I believe." No one questioned her, because Eleanor Dane was just a sweet old woman. Until Lawrence arrived. Lawrence Finch was different. He was thin, with eyes that saw too much. He spoke in a slow, measured way, as if weighing his words carefully. And he watched her. He watched her too closely. One night, as Eleanor prepared his tea, he smiled at her. A strange smile. "I know what you do," he said. Eleanor's hand trembled. "I don't know what you mean, dear." But Lawrence only nodded, taking the cup and drinking it anyway. She buried him that night. A shallow grave, deeper in the yard, away from the others. For the first time she felt something odd in her chest, something like fear. A week passed. then another. Eleanor went about her business as usual. She baked pies. She tended to her garden. But something felt wrong. The air in the house was too still. The shadows too long. At night, she swore she heard footsteps upstairs, even though all the rooms were empty. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stepped outside and froze. One of the graves was open. The earth had been disturbed. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, hands shaking. It was Lawrence's grave, and it was empty. The soil was scattered, like something had crawled out. A chill crept up her spine. The wind shifted. Then, a creak from the porch behind her. She turned too slowly. The door to the house was open, just a crack. She hadn't left it open. The breath hitched in her throat. She knew she should run, knew she should leave, but her feet carried her forward. She stepped inside, the scent of lavender thick in the air. The house was silent, too silent. And then, from the dark hallway, a voice. "Mrs. Dane, you forgot to tuck me in." The whisper slithered across the air, coming from the shadows at the end of the hall. She felt her pulse spike, her hands gripping the railing as she forced herself to breathe. "Who's there?" she whispered. A shuffle. Then, a figure stepped out of the dark. It was Lawrence, or what used to be Lawrence. His clothes were still caked with dirt, his skin pale, stretched too tight across his bones. But his eyes were empty black pits, and he was smiling, too wide, too wrong. Eleanor's breath hitched. She turned to run, but something grabbed her wrist, ice-cold fingers, strong, unrelenting. She gasped, twisting, struggling, but he was too strong. "Mrs. Dane!" His voice was soft, almost gentle. "It's time for bed." And then he dragged her into the dark. The boarding house sat silent. The town went on, unaware. But in the backyard, the soil had been disturbed again, and beneath the morning sun, a single powder blue cardigan lay folded on top of the fresh dirt, waiting. Corey slammed the van door shut, the sound echoing through the cramped interior filled with camera equipment, tripods, and an array of so-called paranormal gadgets. The 6 friends, Corey, Kelly, Paul, Kevin, Sharon, and Jessica, were buzzing with excitement, their laughter and banter masking the underlying tension of their latest scheme. "All right, team," Corey announced, his voice a mix of enthusiasm and arrogance. "Tonight's the big one. Hell, Michigan awaits. Time to snag some killer footage." Kelly rolled her eyes, a smirk playing on her lips. "Yeah, because faking it is totally ethical." Paul leaned back in his seat, trying to stifle a chuckle. "Come on, Kelly, where's your sense of adventure? Plus the subscribers are gonna love this." Kevin, sitting next to Paul, shot him a sarcastic look. "Yeah, nothing says authentic horror like us pretending to be scared." Sharon grinned, always the motivator. "Hey, if we pull this off, we're set for life. No more gigs faking ghost hunts." Jessica, her eyes sparkling with excitement, leaned forward. "Imagine the views when we upload the night we spent in the infamous Caney cabin. Legends say it's haunted by Bartholomew Kane himself." Corey nodded, his enthusiasm infectious. "Exactly. Let's get this show on the road. Hell is not just a name, it's a legend." With a chorus of cheers and high fives, the van rumbled to life and headed toward their destination. The journey to Hell, Michigan, was uneventful, the landscape gradually giving way to dense woods and the eerie stillness that often accompanies small, forgotten villages. As dusk settled, The van pulled up to the heart of hell. The village was small, with rustic buildings that seemed untouched by time. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and an unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. The group stepped out, their excitement now tinged with a hint of unease. Kevin was the first to break the silence, whistling softly. "Hell, huh? Not as hellish as I imagined." Kelly scanned their surroundings, her expression serious. "Don't let the name fool you. This place has some creepy vibes." Corey clapped his hands together, rallying the group. "All right, crew, let's set up at the Kane cabin. Remember, act natural, keep the cameras rolling, and let's make some magic." Paul glanced around nervously, the setting sun casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. "It's kinda spooky, actually. Maybe we shouldn't have done this." Sharon nudged him playfully. "Oh, come on, Paul, scaredy cat. It's all for the views." Jessica pointed toward a run-down log cabin nestled among the trees. "There it is, the Kane cabin." The group approached the cabin, its exterior weathered and worn, yet curiously clean for an abandoned structure. Corey led the way, pushing the door open with a creak that echoed ominously inside. The interior was dimly lit by their flashlights and camera equipment. Dust particles danced in the beams of light, and the air felt thick with history. They spread out, setting up their gear in different corners of the room. Kevin wandered over to a dusty desk in the corner, his flashlight catching something shiny. "Hey, check this out," he called, kneeling down and brushing away the dust to reveal an old, leather-bound book. "It's a journal or something, maybe Bartholomew's." Kelly chuckled, shaking her head. "Probably just some old farmer's ramblings. Let's see." Before Kevin could get a better look, Corey took charge. "All right, let's get some shots outside. Kelly, Paul, you handle the perimeter. Sharon and Jessica, set up the EVP area. I'll handle the cameras inside." Paul looked skeptical. "Seriously, Corey? This feels off." Sharon laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Chill, Paul. It's all part of the act." Kevin, however, was already absorbed in the book, his initial amusement fading as he began to read more intently. "Yeah, just follow the plan," he muttered, though his eyes were glued to the pages. Jessica nudged Sharon. "Let's go before we get bored in here." The group split up, leaving Kevin alone in the cabin. He sat down, opening the book and beginning to read. His curiosity piqued despite the unease creeping up his spine. Outside, Corey, Kelly, Paul, Sharon, and Jessica spread out around the cabin, setting up cameras and props with practiced ease. They occasionally glanced back toward the cabin, unaware of Kevin's growing unease inside. "This is going to look so legit once we edit it," Kelly remarked, adjusting her camera. Paul remained doubtful. "Yeah, legit for a bunch of amateurs." Sharon mockingly offended. "Hey, we're pros in our own minds." Jessica giggled. "Let's just get everything set up, and maybe we can catch something spooky." Corey kept the momentum going. "All right, let's move to the next spot. Keep it tight, people." Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Kevin's fascination with the book turned to concern as he read further. Bartholomew loved his dogs dearly, especially his 2 Dobermans. Farming was his life. His eyes widened as he reached a particular section. "Curse of Bartholomew Kane. Any 6 young adults who lodge here shall face untimely doom." He looked up, unease creeping into his expression. "What the hell is this?" Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He closed the book and stood, glancing nervously toward the cabin door. The stories of Bartholomew Kane and the tragic murders felt all too real now. The group finished setting up outside and began to gather back inside the cabin, looking relaxed and confident in their setup. "All right, everyone back inside. Let's get this started, Corey said, trying to sound authoritative. Kelly, camera ready, added, time to make some magic happen. Paul remained skeptical. Yeah, magic or bullshit. Sharon laughed. You love it. Jessica, excitement still in her voice, said, let's see if we can actually catch something tonight. Kevin hesitated at the door, clutching the open book. Guys, you need to see this. The group turned their attention to him, curiosity and amusement evident on their faces. Kevin held up the book, his voice shaky. This book, it's not just some old journal. It has facts about Bartholomew, his love for his dogs, his farming. But it also mentions a curse. Says that any 6 young adults who stay here will face doom. Kelly rolled her eyes. Yeah, right. More fake lore for our video. Paul looked genuinely concerned. That's messed up, man. Maybe we should just call it a night. Sharon, trying to maintain her usual bravado, suggested, or maybe it's just a local legend. Who knows? Jessica, unease creeping into her tone, added, still, it's creepy. Maybe we should think twice. Corey, ever the leader, dismissed their concerns. Look, it's just a story. We're here for the footage. Let's not get bogged down by old wives' tales. Kevin, however, wasn't convinced. I don't know, Corey. This feels wrong. Maybe we should leave. Kelly snapped back, annoyed. What's your problem, Kev? It's all part of the act. Paul tried to mediate. Maybe Kelly's right. We've come this far. Sharon, attempting to lighten the mood, teased. Yeah, Kev, don't be such a drama queen. Kevin couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Something doesn't feel right. This book, it's like a warning. Corey sighed, realizing the tension had escalated. All right, Kev, we get it, but we're staying. Now let's set up the EVP session. Corey, Kelly, Paul, Sharon, Jessica, and Kevin had just finished setting up their equipment in the Kane cabin. The initial tension had slightly eased as they adjusted their cameras and tested their microphones, the air still thick with unease from the cursed book Kevin had discovered. Paul couldn't shake his curiosity. He glanced over at the open book still resting on the desk and felt a nagging need to delve deeper. I wonder what else is in that book, he mused, his voice cutting through the lingering silence. Kevin looked up from where he sat, eyes wary. Are you serious, Paul? Maybe we should just leave it alone. But Paul was already leaning in, his fingers tracing the faded ink on the page. No, man, this could be good for the video. Let's see what else Bartholomew had to say. He began to read aloud, his voice low and tense. 7 people are responsible for the death of me and my wife. 7 lives must be taken in revenge. 1 has been taken, 6 are still owed. If there are ever 6 people in this house at once, you will experience my wrath. The group fell silent, the weight of Paul's words sinking in. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening as if the very walls were listening. Corey's voice broke the tension, edged with disbelief and frustration. What the fuck, Paul? There's no way in hell he could have written that. He's dead. Sharon stepped forward, trying to inject some rationality into the situation. Maybe it's just a prop after all. This place is really clean. Weird as hell, but maybe someone staged this. Jessica shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Yeah, but why would someone leave a curse in a book? It's creepy. Kelly glanced around, her usual bravado wavering slightly. Maybe it's part of the legend, to scare people off or something. Paul shook his head, his skepticism wavering. No, this feels different. It's like there's some truth to the stories. As the group grappled with the unsettling revelation, their equipment began to act up. The cameras flickered, and the lights dimmed sporadically. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Sharon reached for her phone, trying to capture the anomaly, but the screen went black. Corey stood abruptly, his irritation momentarily overshadowed by genuine concern. What the fuck is going on? Kevin, still clutching the book, looked around nervously. I don't know, but this feels wrong. Suddenly, the equipment gave off a sharp signal, a high-pitched beep that seemed to emanate from outside the cabin. Corey grabbed his flashlight and moved toward the window, peering into the encroaching darkness. "Did you guys hear that?" he called out, his voice tense. The group turned their attention to Corey as he approached the window, shining the beam outside. Through the dim light, a tall figure began to materialize at the edge of the property. The figure was cloaked in a long overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat, obscuring most of its face. It moved slowly, deliberately, each step echoing ominously in the still night. Corey's heart raced as he took in the sight. "Shit, did you guys see that?" Everyone crowded around the window, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The figure continued to advance, its presence sending chills down their spines. The air grew heavy, and the temperature seemed to drop even further, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Kelly tried to steady her voice, though her hands trembled slightly. "Corey, what the hell is that?" Corey took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I don't know, but we need to stay calm. Maybe it's just someone passing by." But Sharon wasn't convinced. Passing by, at this hour, in Hell, Michigan. The figure drew closer, its features still hidden beneath the shadow of the hat and coat. As it reached the boundary of the property, Corey's flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that made the figure appear almost spectral. "Guys, maybe we should leave," Kevin suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. Corey hesitated, torn between his desire to complete the investigation and the growing fear gripping his team. "No, we've come this far. Let's not back out now." Just as Corey was about to respond, the figure stopped, turning its head slightly toward the cabin. The room seemed to grow even colder, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant sounds of the night. Then, inexplicably, the figure began dropping small, dark seeds near the front and back of the property. The group watched in confused silence as the man continued his eerie actions, the seeds scattering across the ground in a deliberate pattern. "What the actual fuck is he doing?" Sharon whispered, her voice tinged with fear. The man now stood just in front of the cabin's front door, head tilted down, his eyes unseen beneath the brim of his hat. The atmosphere was thick with dread as the group exchanged uneasy glances. "Guys, let's just leave. Fuck this isn't a prank. And if it is, it's a damn good one," Paul urged, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine fear. Paul took a hesitant step toward the door, his mind racing. Desperate to defuse the situation, he decided to try and communicate. "Look, we're not here to cause any trouble. We'll leave if you want us to." With a shaky hand, he reached for the door handle and slowly opened it. As the door creaked ajar, a red glow began to emanate from within the cabin, casting an ominous hue over Paul's face. The moment the glow touched him, Paul felt an invisible force grip him, paralyzing his body and forcing him to step outside. "Eat, my beloved beasts," Bartholomew groaned, his voice a deep, gravelly echo that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath their feet. Paul's eyes glazed over, his movements becoming mechanical as he was compelled to obey the sinister command. He staggered toward the open door, his body no longer his own, and the seeds that had been scattered on the ground began to sprout rapidly. vines twisted and curled, transforming into two hideous hellhounds with glowing red eyes and snarling maws dripping with darkness. The hellhounds lunged at Paul with unnatural speed, tearing into him with savage ferocity. His screams were muffled by the oppressive energy surrounding him as his skin began to ripple and melt, exposing the raw, twisted flesh beneath. The group could only watch in absolute terror as Paul was ripped apart by the demonic creatures, his body disintegrating into a grotesque display of agony and despair. Bartholomew turned his attention back to his house, the red glow fading as he withdrew into the shadows. The room felt like it was closing in on them, the oppressive darkness pressing against their senses. The hellhounds remained, their menacing presence a constant reminder of the curse's deadly power. Corey's voice trembled with fear. "We need to close the door," he shouted, lunging toward it desperately. His hands trembled as he grabbed the handle and slammed the door shut. The group stood frozen, caught between disbelief and sheer terror as the reality of their situation sank in. The legend of Bartholomew Kane was no longer just a story. It was a horrifying nightmare unfolding before their eyes. The hellhounds growled, their eyes burning with malevolent intent, and the air in the cabin grew thick with the scent of brimstone and decay. "We need to get out of here," Kelly whispered, her usual bravado shattered by the unfolding horror. Before Corey could regain control, the cursed book on the desk began to open on its own. Pages fluttered wildly, turning slowly as if an invisible hand was flipping through them. The group watched in horror as the book settled on a page and the words began to shift and rearrange themselves. Jessica, driven by a mix of fear and determination, stepped forward. "I need to close it," she said, reaching out to grab the book. But as her fingers touched the cover, the room seemed to pulse with dark energy. Suddenly, an invisible force grabbed her, lifting her off the ground. She struggled, trying to pull away, but the grip was unrelenting. "Let me go," Jessica screamed, her voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Blood began to leak from her mouth and eyes, streaming down her face like water from a faucet. Her screams were cut short as the force violently dropped her back to the floor, lifeless and drenched in blood. The book snapped shut, only to begin opening again moments later, the pages turning slowly as if someone, or something, was still reading it. The remaining members of the group were paralyzed with fear, their eyes darting between the book and the hellhounds, now prowling the cabin. One by one, the curse took hold. Kelly, trying to maintain her composure, reached for her camera to document the horror. But as she lifted it, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The camera slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor as shadows twisted around her limbs. She gasped for air, her body contorting unnaturally before collapsing. Her life drained away in a grotesque display. Sharon, witnessing Kelly's demise, turned to run but found her legs rooted to the spot. The hellhounds advanced, their eyes burning with malevolent intent. Before she could react, their jaws closed around her, tearing her apart with brutal efficiency. Her screams echoed through the cabin, mingling with the sinister whispers emanating from the cursed book. Corey, now fully aware of the impending doom, along with Kevin, both terrified, decide to make a run for the van outside. Corey opens the door and runs out first. Bartholomew's eyes immediately focused on him, once again turning red and casting an eerie glow on Corey as he walked toward one of the hounds and is torn apart. Kevin, the last to remain, stared in disbelief at the carnage surrounding him. His mind raced, searching for any way to escape, but there was no escape. The curse of Bartholomew Kane was to be fulfilled tonight. The The two hellhounds circled him, their growls vibrating through his very bones. As they lunged, Kevin was torn apart. His screams echoed throughout the night as his body was shredded by the relentless beasts. With the last of the group destroyed, the cabin fell silent once more. The sound of the soft rustling of the cursed book's pages stopped. The book closed. Bartholomew Kane, his mission of vengeance complete, walked away with his two hellhounds by his side. A figure in a long white dress followed them, her presence ethereal and haunting as she moved with them into the dense forest. Together they disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind the grim monument of the 6 souls lost to the dark curse of Hell, Michigan. The village reclaimed its eerie silence, the legend of Bartholomew Kane now etched into the fabric of reality. The cursed cabin stood as a grim reminder to all who dared to trespass into its haunted confines. A warning whispered through generations about the night 6 lives were brutally taken by the wrath of a vengeful farmer and his loyal, deadly hounds.